He went into the frozen forest with nothing left to lose, haunted by a voice only he could hear. But instead of silence, he found a metal door sealed inside a massive rock. What waited behind it wasn't just a hidden shelter, it was a truth the world had erased, and a miracle God refused to let stay buried. Before we begin, please help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support truly means the world to us. The Appalachian forest lay buried under fresh snow, the cold pressing inward from every direction. The night stretched long and breathless, broken only by wind threading through bare branches. Jack Carter slept in fragments, never whole. The tarp shelter sagged under the weight of snow, its edges stiff with ice, the ground beneath him frozen hard as stone. He was 47, tall once, still broad-shouldered beneath layers of worn clothing, but time and grief had carved him lean and sharp. His face was angular, cheeks hollowed, jaw shadowed by a coarse, uneven beard streaked with gray he no longer bothered to trim. A scar ran faintly from his left eyebrow into his hairline, half hidden beneath messy dark brown hair that refused to lie flat. His hands, large, cracked, scarred, curled into fists even in sleep. He had been a Marine for 22 years. Discipline still lived in his bones, even now, even here. But the war had followed him home, and then something worse had stayed behind when the uniform came off. The snow creaked as he shifted. His breath fogged the air beneath the tarp. Somewhere in the dark, his heart began to race. He knew what was coming before it arrived. "Jack?" The voice slipped through the silence as gently as falling ash. Not loud, not distant, close enough to feel against his ear. He snapped awake, breath tearing from his chest, eyes wide and searching the dark. It wasn't the sound of gunfire that haunted him anymore, not the echo of explosions or shouted commands. It was her voice, soft, familiar, saying his name the way it always had, like it belonged to her. His head turned sharply, scanning the blackness beyond the tarp. Snow reflected faint starlight, empty and untouched. No footprints, no shape, no one there. His throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words automatic, rehearsed over countless nights. His hand shook as if expecting a weapon that wasn't there. He pressed his palms to his face, trying to ground himself, trying to remember where he was. The forest answered with silence. The voice faded, but the damage lingered, spreading through his chest like frostbite. A warm weight pressed against his side. Shadow had moved without sound, the way he always did. The German shepherd was large, nearly 90 pounds, black and white fur thick and weathered, his back dusted with snow. His muzzle was graying now, the amber of his eyes softer than it had been years ago, but still alert, still watching. Shadow had been military once too, a K-9 trained for patrol and detection, before age and injury ended his service. He circled Jack once deliberately, then lay across his legs and lower chest, anchoring him. The dog's breathing was slow, steady, intentional. Jack's fists loosened, fingers unclenching against the rough fabric of his coat. Shadow's ears flicked at the forest sounds, but his body stayed pressed close, absorbing the tremors running through the man beneath him. Jack rested his forehead against the dog's neck, breathing in the scent of fur and cold air. Shadow did not whine or lick or demand attention. He simply stayed. He always stayed. Gradually, Jack's breathing slowed, the violent shaking easing into exhaustion instead of panic. Sleep did not return easily. It never did. Jack lay awake, listening to the wind scrape across the tarp, feeling the cold seep deeper despite the layers between him and the ground. His mind drifted backward without permission. He saw headlights on wet pavement, heard metal folding, remembered a phone call that split his life cleanly in two while he was half a world away, wearing a uniform that suddenly felt like a lie. His wife's face came to him not as she had died, but as she had lived, laughing softly, brow creased in concentration when she read, always reaching for his hand without looking. He had missed the funeral, missed the last goodbye. The guilt had settled in him like a second spine, holding him upright while hollowing him out. The voice came again, quieter this time, almost swallowed by the wind. "Jack!" He closed his eyes, jaw clenched, refusing to turn his head. If he looked, he knew he would only find emptiness. Shadow shifted slightly, sensing the change, his tail thumping once against the frozen ground. Jack swallowed hard, forcing the present back into focus. Snow, forest, dog, breath. By the time the night loosened its grip, Jack was no longer shaking. He sat up slowly, joints stiff, muscles aching from the cold. Dawn had not yet arrived, but the sky had lightened to a dull gray, the snow reflecting just enough visibility to move. He adjusted the tarp, brushing off the fresh accumulation, hands numb despite the gloves. Shadow rose with him, stretching, shaking snow from his coat before standing at Jack's side. Up close, the dog showed his age in small ways, a slight limp in the rear leg, a cloudiness at the edge of one eye. But his posture was straight, his attention unwavering. Jack rested a hand on Shadow's head, fingers threading briefly through thick fur. He didn't speak. Words felt dangerous before sunrise. The voice had not returned, but its echo lingered, lodged behind his ribs. He should have moved on, found a safer place, a lower elevation. Winter was tightening its hold. Instead, he stood there longer than necessary, staring into the trees. Somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the grief and the cold, something restless stirred, an unease he couldn't yet name, only feel. Shadow pulled Jack off the narrow trail without warning, the leashless movement sharp and deliberate, the way it had been when the dog still wore a harness and answered to hand signals instead of words. Jack stumbled, boots sliding on packed snow, irritation flashing before instinct took over. Shadow never did this without reason. Ahead, the trees thinned, opening onto a steep rise where a massive boulder jutted from the slope like a frozen wave, its surface scarred by time and split by dark seams. Jack had passed this formation before without noticing more than its size. Up close, it dwarfed him, swallowing sound, blocking wind. Shadow stopped at its base, head low, ears forward. That was when Jack saw it. A rectangle that didn't belong, a metal door set flush into the stone, its edges softened by rust and ice, its surface dull and pitted, half buried beneath wind-blown snow. No handle was visible at first glance, only a recessed grip worn smooth by years of use. Jack's pulse quickened. The door radiated cold, but beneath it lingered a faint stale scent, old smoke, damp stone, something human. He hesitated, the forest suddenly too quiet. Then Shadow nudged the door with his shoulder, metal scraping softly against rock, and it swung inward with a sound that crawled straight up Jack's spine. Inside, the air changed immediately. The cold bit harder, sharper, the kind that sank into bone. The passage was narrow, walls close enough to brush his shoulders, the ceiling low and uneven. Jack's breath echoed back at him, louder than it should have been. The smell of ash grew stronger, layered and ancient, clinging to the stone like a memory that refused to fade. As his eyes adjusted, he saw soot-blackened rock and shallow grooves worn smooth by countless hands and boots. Then the voice came, not from ahead, not behind, everywhere. "Jack?" It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. The sound folded in on itself, bouncing off stone, turning intimate and relentless, like being spoken to from inside his own skull. His hands began to shake, fingers curling involuntarily, the familiar surge of adrenaline crashing through him. His heart hammered so hard it hurt. A high ringing filled his ears, drowning out everything except her voice. He was no longer in the forest. He was back underground, back in places where light never reached, and orders came through walls. His knees buckled. Shadow was there instantly. The dog pressed his full weight against Jack's legs and torso, pinning him gently but firmly to the ground. The German shepherd's body was solid and warm against the cold stone, his breathing slow and deliberate, a steady rhythm Jack could latch onto. Shadow's fur brushed Jack's trembling hands, grounding him in the present. Jack gasped, trying to pull air into lungs that refused to cooperate. The voice didn't stop. It whispered his name the way it always had, without anger, without blame, and that made it worse. His vision tunneled, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Shadow shifted, placing his head beneath Jack's chin, forcing his focus downward, away from the walls, away from the sound. Minutes stretched, or seconds. Time lost meaning. Gradually the ringing eased, the pounding slowed. Jack swallowed, throat raw, and forced himself to move. He staggered back toward the door, one hand scraping against the stone for balance. Cold bit through his gloves. The voice followed, softer now but persistent, trailing him like breath on glass. When he burst back into daylight, the forest rushed in, wind, open space, snow, bright silence. He sucked in air that tasted clean and sharp, his chest burning. Shadow stayed close, circling once before standing guard, eyes scanning the trees. Jack bent forward, hands on his knees, fighting the urge to vomit. He didn't look back at the door. He couldn't. As he moved away, boots crunching through snow, the voice lingered at the edge of hearing, fading only when the boulder disappeared behind the trees. That night, long after darkness fell, Jack would realize something that unsettled him more than the panic itself. The call hadn't ended when he left the stone. It had simply learned how to follow. Jack returned to the stone at first light, the forest stripped of menace by daylight, but not of weight. Snow clung to the slope in thin sheets, crusted where yesterday's wind had scoured it hard. Shadow ranged ahead, nose low, tracing the same invisible logic that had led him here before. Jack moved slower, every step deliberate. In the clear light, he could see what panic had hidden from him. The ground near the door was pressed flatter than the surrounding forest floor, not scraped by animals, but compacted by repeated human passage. Inside, the air felt less threatening, though no warmer. He did not go far. He didn't need to. Along the walls, at knee height and lower, the stone had been worn smooth in arcs that matched the swing of shoulders and the drag of boots. Soot lay in layered stains, old and newer, telling of fires built carefully and extinguished with discipline. This place had been lived in, not briefly, not recklessly. It had known routines. Jack's jaw tightened as the realization settled. He crouched, running a gloved hand along the wall until his fingers found the marks, letters cut shallow, hesitant, clustered where light would fall from a fire. Names. Not carved proudly, but tucked away as if meant only to be remembered by those who already knew them. One name stopped him. It was plain, unadorned, the letters uneven, cut by a hand that had trembled or weakened toward the end. It matched the name of an old man who had once shared a bottle with Jack behind a shuttered gas station, a man bent thin as wire, with snow-white stubble and skin cracked like dried riverbeds. The man had called Jack Marine with a crooked smile, voice rough but respectful, and had spoken little else. He had frozen to death the previous winter, found beneath an overpass, his pockets empty, his story finished on paper. Jack had helped carry the body when no one else would. Seeing the name here felt like a blow to the ribs. He counted his breaths. Shadow sat back on his haunches, watching Jack's face instead of the dark. The forest remained silent, indifferent. Jack straightened, backing out without touching the letters again. He didn't want to disturb them. He didn't want to pretend he understood yet. That night, the cold sharpened. Jack did not drink. The bottle stayed buried beneath his pack, untouched, its weight a familiar promise he refused for the first time in months. He built a small fire, careful to keep it low, and ate in silence. Shadow lay close, his muzzle resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. When sleep came, it came thin and shallow. The voice found him anyway. It was clearer now, no longer a thread, but a presence, gentle and unmistakable. "You're still there," she said, not as a question but with a pause that invited one. "Aren't you?" Jack's chest tightened. He stared into the dark beyond the firelight, seeing only snow and branches and the soft plume of his own breath. He wanted to answer. He wanted to say he was sorry, that he had tried, that he had failed in all the ways that mattered. Instead, he said nothing. His silence felt heavier than any confession. The voice did not press him. It lingered, then receded, leaving the space between heartbeats too wide. Morning brought a dull resolve. Jack packed slowly, movements precise, habits from another life reasserting themselves. He did not decide anything aloud. He did not name what he was becoming part of. He only knew that the names in the stone had changed the shape of the days ahead. Shadow rose when Jack did, tail giving a single measured sweep. Together they turned back toward the trees, away from the door, carrying with them a truth that would not stay buried. Jack paused once, looking over his shoulder at the slope. The forest gave nothing back. He took that as permission to keep going. Jack met her at the edge of a plowed turnout where the county road thinned into ice and ruts. The vehicle looked abandoned at first, a dented blue pickup with rust gnawing at the wheel wells, its windshield webbed with cracks. But someone lived inside it. Mary Collins stepped out slowly, as if careful not to startle the world. She was in her early 60s, tall and spare, her frame narrowed by years of rationing comfort. Wind lifted strands of iron-gray hair from a loose braid that fell over one shoulder. Her skin was pale and weathered, the kind that had known too many winters without shelter, and her eyes were a clear, steady blue that did not flinch when they met Jack's. She wore a man's work jacket several sizes too large, the cuffs frayed, the fabric faded into softness by use. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but unafraid. She told Jack she lived there now, between the road and the trees, because moving felt like admitting something she refused to admit. Her husband, Tom Collins, had been declared dead after an industrial accident years ago. The papers said so. The town said so. She did not. "You don't bury someone without a body," she said simply, as if stating a rule older than law. Jack listened without interrupting, his face unreadable, his shoulders set. PTSD had taught him caution. Hope, offered too easily, had teeth. He did not believe her. He believed in documents, in finality, in the way a life could be closed by a signature while the living were left to manage the quiet. He nodded, thanked her for the information, and would have walked away if Shadow hadn't stopped. The German shepherd froze, nostrils flaring, then stepped closer to Mary with a low, uncertain whine. He sniffed the jacket again, more insistently, pressing his nose into the fabric near the collar. A soft sound escaped his throat, recognition, not alarm. He leaned against Mary's leg and stayed there. Jack felt a tightening behind his sternum. Shadow did not do this. He trusted people rarely, and never without cause. Mary looked down at the dog with a startled tenderness, her hand hovering before resting, careful on his head. "You remember him," she said, not to Shadow, but to the jacket. "That's his coat, or it was." She swallowed. "I kept it because it still smells like work, like the end of a day." Jack shifted his weight, unease replacing skepticism. He still did not agree with her, but he no longer dismissed her. Mary noticed the phone in Jack's hand when he checked the time. She asked gently if he had a picture. He hesitated, then showed her a photograph he'd taken inside the stone, the low light, the soot-dark walls, the faint carvings near the floor. Mary leaned closer, breath catching. Her finger traced the screen without touching it. "That mark," she said, pointing to a shallow symbol cut beside a name. "Tom did that. He marked everything he fixed, said it was how you left proof for yourself when nobody else was looking. Her voice held steady, but her hands trembled. Jack felt the ground shift beneath him, not with certainty, but with possibility. He ended the conversation soon after, offering nothing he could not give. Mary returned to her truck, shoulders squared, carrying her truth with the quiet endurance of someone practiced at being disbelieved. Shadow watched her until the door closed, then looked back at Jack, ears tipped forward, waiting. That night, the wind threaded through the trees with a low, patient sound. Jack lay awake beside a small fire, staring into embers that refused to settle. He expected the call. He braced for it. Instead, there was only the wind and the distant creak of branches under snow. When the voice came, it was not a summons. It did not say his name. It did not ask him to turn back. It whispered once, close and calm. "Listen." Jack exhaled, long and slow. Shadow shifted nearer, their breaths aligning. For the first time since the stone, Jack did not feel chased. He did not answer. He listened. Jack found Earl Thompson the second time by accident, or so it felt, though nothing about it truly was. The first meeting had been brief and evasive, a man standing half-turned beside a chain-link fence, answering questions with shrugs and narrowed eyes. Earl was in his late 50s, thick through the shoulders, but slumped now, as if gravity had learned his weak points. His beard was coarse and uneven, more gray than brown, his face squared and weathered by years of wind and dust. A healed break had left his nose slightly crooked, and a pale scar cut down one cheek, the kind that came from metal moving faster than skin. He spoke with the guarded politeness of someone who had learned, the hard way, that words could cost him. That day, Jack had let him go. Today, after the stone had been disturbed, after fresh scratches marred the door and the soot inside lay smeared as if someone had searched in haste, Jack did not. Earl tried to walk past him, eyes sliding away, but Jack stepped into his path. Shadow stood close, posture rigid, not threatening, simply present. They spoke in the open cold, breath fogging between them. Earl's hands shook as he lit a cigarette he didn't finish. He said little at first, then less. Only when Jack mentioned the names carved low in the stone did Earl's jaw tighten. He looked older in that moment, smaller, as if the years he'd carried finally pressed down at once. Earl had been a sight guard once, he admitted, back when the work ran night and day and corners were cut because schedules mattered more than men. He had watched injuries become inconveniences, watched supervisors decide which problems were cheaper to solve quietly. When Jack pressed, Earl's voice dropped. "They weren't dead," he said, not looking up. "Not always. Some couldn't work anymore. Some just didn't fit the report." He swallowed. After a while, they weren't worth filing twice. Jack felt heat rise behind his eyes. Earl went on, slower now, each word weighed and reluctant. They kept them alive, out of sight, until he trailed off. When he spoke again, his tone was flat, almost rehearsed. They didn't have labor value anymore. The words struck like a physical blow. In Jack's head, the forest fell away. The voice returned, sharp and unmistakable, calling his name with a clarity that made him spin around, fists already clenched. For a heartbeat, he wasn't standing on frozen ground. He was back in rooms where people were reduced to numbers and outcomes, where loss was logged and moved past. He lunged. Earl stumbled, hitting the fence hard, metal rattling. Jack's hands closed around Earl's collar, strength surging unchecked, vision narrowing to a single point. He felt the thud of his own pulse in his ears, the echo of the word value twisting into something murderous. Shadow hit him from the side, full weight and momentum, knocking Jack off balance. The dog's bark cut through the moment, short, sharp, commanding. Shadow wedged himself between Jack and Earl, body braced, eyes locked on Jack's face. Jack froze, chest heaving, teeth bared like a cornered animal. The voice faltered, then receded. He staggered back, dropping to one knee in the snow, hands shaking violently. Earl slid down the fence and did not get up right away. When he did, he said nothing more. He didn't need to. Jack walked away without looking back, Shadow glued to his side. It took a long time before his hands stopped trembling. As they moved through the trees, the realization settled, heavy and undeniable. The people in the stone hadn't only been erased by paperwork and convenience. They had been measured, weighed, and dismissed. And somewhere along the way, when Jack had been gone, when duty had taken precedence over home, he had been measured too. Not by employers or supervisors, but by absence. By missed moments that could not be priced until it was too late. The forest closed in around them, silent witness to a truth Jack could no longer outrun. Jack returned to the stone before dawn, the cold sharp enough to keep his thoughts clear. Shadow paced the perimeter while Jack moved inside with deliberate care, counting steps, mapping the chambers by memory rather than light. The disturbance Earl had hinted at left a pattern. Scuffed soot where boots had turned too quickly, a storage niche emptied with haste, a wall whose surface felt wrong beneath Jack's gloves. It wasn't the stone's age that betrayed it, but its temperature, slightly warmer, less settled. Jack pressed, listened, and found the seam. The false wall came apart with patient effort, stones wedged and disguised by someone practiced at concealment. Behind it lay a narrow cavity, dry and carefully kept. Inside were bundles wrapped in oil-treated cloth, tied with cord worn smooth by handling. Paper, not rotted. Ink, not bled away. Jack sat back on his heels, breath fogging, and began to read. The list was plain and utilitarian. Names in block letters, dates, short marks that looked like accounting symbols rather than words. Different hands, different pressures. Some entries neat and confident, others cramped, as if written in poor light or with shaking fingers. Jack recognized the pattern at once. It wasn't memorial. It was inventory. Crossed-out names bore a single line, efficient and final. Circled names carried small ticks beside them, updated over time. He photographed every page, then again with scale and angle, then copied the contents by hand, the marine habit of redundancy returning without invitation. Shadow watched from the doorway, ears forward, body still. Jack did not call the local police. He had learned enough to know how silence worked here. Instead, he encrypted the files, duplicated them onto 2 drives, and wrapped the originals exactly as he'd found them. Evidence needed patience. That night, Jack built no fire. He sat in the inner chamber where the air lay still, the stone holding the day's cold, like a memory. The voice came once more, not loud, not urgent. "You can't stay here forever," she said, close and calm, the way she used to speak when he lingered too long at the door before deployment. Jack closed his eyes. He felt the ache of the place, the pull to hide where truth had been made small enough to manage. For the first time, he answered, "I know." The words were steady. He didn't apologize. He didn't bargain. Shadow shifted nearer, flank touching Jack's knee, a quiet agreement. The voice did not return. At first light, Jack sealed the wall as best he could, leaving it imperfect on purpose. He packed quickly, movements efficient, mind already turned outward. A journalist waited 2 towns over, Lena Morales, mid-30s, compact and sharp-eyed, with cropped black hair and a habit of listening longer than she spoke. She had earned Jack's trust the hard way years ago by printing names when others softened them. He did not imagine safety. He imagined momentum. As he stepped back into the forest, the stone receded behind branches and snow, its silence altered by what it had given up. Jack did not look back again. Some truths could survive only if carried forward. Months passed, then a year, measured not by calendars, but by hearings, sealed rooms, and the slow grind of names returning to records where they belonged. Federal investigators came quietly at first, then with purpose. The stone was logged, the list corroborated, the pattern traced across contracts and decades. Mary Collins stood straighter the day they called her back to a county office, her iron-gray hair pinned neatly, her hands folded to stop their shaking. When Tom Collins walked in, thinner, older, his shoulders set by pain and stubborn survival, Mary crossed the room without hesitation and held him as if the world might try to revise them again. Tom's face was weathered, beard trimmed close, eyes still the clear brown of a man who had learned to count risks. He said little, only pressed his forehead to Mary's and breathed. Jack did not intrude. He watched from the doorway with Shadow at his side, feeling the weight lift in increments rather than all at once. Jack's life did not reset. Therapy continued. Weekly sessions with Dr. Alan Brooks, a soft-spoken man in his 50s with careful eyes and a habit of letting silence work. Alan never promised cure. He offered tools, patterns, patience. Some nights Jack still woke drenched in sweat, heart racing, the call brushing the edges of his sleep like a distant radio. But he had a place now, a small timber cabin on the edge of a veteran's property, built by hands that understood utility over comfort. It smelled of pine and coffee and cold mornings. Shadow aged into it with him, the gray along his muzzle deepening, his gait slower but assured. The cabin took in others, too, retired K-9s with scars and stories, their handlers stopping by to sit, to listen, to leave quieter than they arrived. Jack learned the shape of days again, chopping wood, walking the ridge, cooking meals that required attention. Structure returned without uniforms. On the anniversary of the night he left the stone, Jack hung a photograph on the cabin wall. His wife and child smiled from a summer long gone, light caught in their hair, an ordinary happiness that had once terrified him to touch. He centered the frame, adjusted it once, then let his hands fall. Evening gathered. Snow dusted the sill. When the voice came, it was barely more than breath, far and gentle, threaded through the settling dark. Jack did not turn. He did not search the corners or the trees. He placed his hand on Shadow's chest, feeling the steady rise and fall, and stayed where he was. The call did not vanish. It simply lost its grip. Outside, the night kept its promises, cold, quiet, honest, and inside, Jack stood, present, unpulled, alive. Sometimes the miracle is not a voice from heaven, but the strength God gives us to keep walking when the night feels endless. If this story touched you, remember, you're not forgotten. Share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment with where you're watching from and subscribe to support more stories like this. May God bless you and your loved ones.